In this session, we are going to look on different authorization levels on files and directories, ownership and permissions of files and directories, and we are also looking at how to change file and directories permission. In Linux, you can have two kinds of authorization on a file or a directory: ownership authorization and permission authorization. Let's have a look what is an ownership authorization and what is a permission authorization. In an ownership authorization, there are three types of owners, which are user, group, and other. A user owner means the owner of the file or directory who created that file or directory. So by default, the user who created a file is going to be the owner of that file. A group can have one or multiple users added to that group, and all those users are going to have an ownership on that particular file or a directory. And other means anyone else except the user and the group members. Same way, there are three types of permissions as well: read, write, and execute. So in Linux, a read permission represented by letter R, a write permission represented by letter W, execute permission represented by letter X. There are some differences between read, write, and execute permission for a file and directory. For a file, a read permission means which allows a file to be read, whereas for a directory, a read permission means which allows the file names in the directory to be listed. A write permission for a file means which allows a file to modify, whereas a write permission for a directory means which allows add, remove, and rename actions on files in the directory. An execute permission for a file means which allows the execution of a file, like program file or script file, whereas an execute permission on a directory means which allows access to the contents of the directory. So these are the main differences in terms of read, write, and execute permission on file and directories. So in a nutshell, a file can have three types of owners: user, group, and other, and each of these owners can have permissions like read, write, and execute. For example, this is an output of ls-l command for a file called test.txt. Here, if you take the highlighted portion, the first letter which indicates the file type. This we have already discussed in our earlier session. So in this case, the test.txt file is a regular file. As I said earlier, there are many file types available in Linux, like directory type, link type, block device type, etc. So in case of a directory, this character would be letter D. In case of a link, this character would be letter L. Okay, so that's about the file type. The remaining portion is actually talking about the permissions. What are those permissions? The first three set of characters are talking about the owner permission. So as we said, a R represent for read, W represent for write, and X represent for execute, and a hyphen represent no permission. So in this case, the owner of this file has read and write permission, but he doesn't have execute permission. If you take the next three set of characters, which is talking about the group ownership permission. The group ownership permission for this file is read, write, and no execute. The last three set of characters are talking about the other ownership permission, which means other users are going to have only read permission on this particular file. You can set permissions on a file or directory using chmod command. There are two ways of setting permission using chmod: an absolute or numeric mode and a symbolic mode. You can use either of this mode with a chmod command. Let's have a look on numeric mode permission settings. In numeric mode, you will have basically 4 numbers. Number 0 represents for no permission. Number 1 represents execute permission. Number 2 represents write permission, and number 4 represents read permission. Now using these numbers, you can set the permission on a file or directory. For example, I have a test.txt file where I want to set the permissions for that file like read, write, execute permission for owner, read and write execute permission for group, and only the read permission for other. First, we are going to set the permission for owner or the user. I want to set read, write and execute permission for user. So we are going to have the command like chmod and then the read permission represented by number 4. So we are going to take number 4 and write permission represented by number 2. He also needs the execute permission, so we are going to set the execute permission as well. The number for execute permission is 1. So we are going to add all this together like 4 plus 2 plus 1, which means 7. So the number for read, write and execute permission is 7. We are going to set 7 here. This belongs to user or owner of that file. He has now read, write and execute permission. Next we will set read, write permission for group. For that, the number would be 6. How? Read plus write, which means 4 plus 2. And next we are going to set the permission for other, which has only read permission. So the number for read is 4. We are going to set number 4 here. And then the file name followed by a space. So by adding these 3 numbers, we can have these kinds of permissions. The number 3 is 2 plus 1, which is write and execute. Number 5 is read and execute, which is 4 plus 1. Number 6 is read plus write, which is 4 plus 2. Number 7 is read, write and execute, which is 4 plus 2 plus 1. The number 0 represents for no permissions. I am going to redefine the permission for group for this particular file. I am taking out the read, write permission. I only want to set read permission. So can you guess how the permission numbers will be? The numbers are 7, 4, 4. The number 7 is read, write and execute for owner. The number 4 only read, which is for group, and again the number 4 read, which is for other. Next, I am going to take out the read permission of other ownership type. So we can use the chmod command this way. Chmod 740 test.txt. Here 0 means no permission, which means the other owner type doesn't have any permission on this file. The sequence is very important here. The first numeric value indicates owner permission, second one indicates the group permission, third one indicates the other ownership permission. We'll be discussing the symbolic mode permission setting in the next video, and we will also discuss about how to change user ownership and group ownership of a file. We will be covering the practical session also in the next video. We will have a look on the summary of this session. We have discussed about 2 kinds of authorization level, permission level and ownership level. In an ownership level, for a file can have a user, group and other ownerships. And all of these 3 ownerships can have read, write and execute permissions. And those will be represented by R, W and X respectively. There are 2 kinds of permission modes, numeric mode and symbolic mode. You can use either of these modes to set a permission for a file or directory. Chmod is the command which you can use to set permission on a file or directory. You can use these 0 to 7 numbers in order to set permission on a file or directory in numeric mode.